We have also been the target of online threats for our speech for daring to say that biological sex is relevant to sexual orientation, that single-sex spaces are essential for homosexual community, and that so-called gender transition of minors can harm proto-gay kids. Last week, we witnessed what happens when online threats bleeds into real life, and we couldn't help but think, this could have happened to one of us.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the LGB Alliance USA News Roundup for the week ending on September 15th, 2025. Today, we will cover the following news stories. A Brazilian court declines to pursue case against Isabella Cêpa in a victory for feminist free speech. Canadian researcher Gordon Guyatt scrambles to cover up his tracks in a podcast interview with Stella O'Malley and Mia Hughs. The 11th Circuit Court upholds the right to deny insurance coverage for transgender surgeries. And we'll end with our statement on the assassination of conservative podcaster Charlie Kirk. However, before we begin, we'd like to remind people that the Federal Trade Commission's public comment period regarding minor gender-affirming care closes September 26th, right before midnight. So please, if you haven't already, please submit your public comments online. We'll put a link in the show notes. And now we'll turn to the news. First, an update on the case of Isabella Cêpa, the Brazilian woman who found asylum in Europe after Brazil tried prosecuting her for her gender-critical statements. It's now being reported by Cêpa herself on X, as well as the European conservative magazine, that on September 2nd, Brazilian courts have archived the case against her. That means that the court will no longer, for the time being, pursue the case against her. The case was not, however, dismissed, meaning the courts could theoretically reopen the case against her in the future. And because Cêpa could be rearrested for saying more gender-critical comments, it's still unsafe for her to return home. Still, Cêpa considers this a big victory, as she explained to the European conservative, quote, "It is still not clear if transphobia is a crime or not because people are being prosecuted anyway. It's a big win because they wanted me to be the first feminist to go to prison, and I ended up being the first feminist to have my case archived and being granted refugee status for this. The precise opposite of what they intended." Unquote. So congratulations to Cêpa on this victory for free speech. And we hope that there will be more victories in the future and she can come home to her country safely. And now an update on the controversy regarding Gordon Guyatt. Guyatt was the Canadian researcher who started evidence-based medicine and who recently signed a statement with his colleagues saying he didn't want his research used to oppose pediatric gender transition. This came after releasing papers earlier this year that found that the evidence in support of pediatric transition was weak. Well, on September 8th, Guyatt was interviewed by Mia Hughs and Stella O'Malley, and there is a remarkable exchange in which he forcefully denies that he ever called pediatric gender transition medically necessary. Hughs then quotes the last sentence of the last paragraph of the statement Guyatt signed, which says, quote, "As recommended by community advocates, we have also personally made a donation to EGAL Canada's legal and justice work, noting their litigation efforts aimed at preventing the denial of medically necessary care for gender-diverse youth." Unquote. Guyatt goes on to admit he is a dope who didn't read the statement carefully. He continued to be very defensive, however, saying that we shouldn't make a big deal about the fact that he signed a document that he didn't read properly. I found it bizarre, kind of amusing, but also deeply troubling, because it seems to me like this is an example of a medical professional caring more about protecting his reputation than carefully articulating his true opinions. We'll put a link to the full video interview and the clip in question in the show notes. I encourage you to watch and judge for yourself. And now turning to legal news. On September 9th, the 11th Circuit Court upheld the right to deny insurance coverage for transgender related surgeries. This case involved a trans identifying male, Anna Lang, who was a deputy at the sheriff's office in Houston County, Georgia. He wanted to get gender medicalization surgeries, but found out the county's insurance policy would not cover such treatments. The county insurance policy did, however, cover other treatments for gender dysphoria, including hormone use, which Lang took advantage of. It just didn't cover the cost of the surgeries. Lang sued the county under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, arguing this was a case of disparate treatment due to sex. The 11th Circuit Court rejected Lang's argument, arguing that Lang was not in fact treated differently due to protected characteristics. The 11th Circuit Court used the Supreme Court's Scrimeti ruling as a precedent here. It was an 8-5 decision with one concurring opinion and one concurrence in judgment. I'm not going to go into the details, but there was a lot of squabbling in the opinions about the Supreme Court's Bostock ruling, as well as the Scrimeti ruling's reliance on Geduldig, which was the ruling that allowed insurance companies to deny pregnancy-related health claims. The important thing here is that the weight of the Scrimeti ruling is starting to reverberate down through the lower courts. And it's interesting because while Scrimeti dealt with state bans on pediatric transition, this case involved insurance coverage for adult transition. So it will be interesting to see how wide the scope of Scrimeti will end up being. And now I'll hand it to you, Sylvia, for our statement on the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Thanks, Ariane. Last week, on September 10th, Charlie Kirk was shot and killed. He was known for his fiery and oftentimes offensive hot takes, his Christian conservative values, and mobilizing conservative youth through an org he helped found called Turning Point USA. He was also known for going to college campuses and encouraging debate, being challenged by those who not only disagreed with him, but hated him for it. It was during one of those college campus debates that Charlie Kirk was murdered. While the exact motives of the shooter are yet to be determined, this murder is regarded by many as a political assassination. This murder was an attack on freedom of speech, which is a value that every United States citizen should hold as paramount. Our First Amendment acknowledges that the freedom to speak freely is a basic human right. We in the United States often take this right for granted because we simply cannot fathom a society where speech is censored. But on September 10th, that basic human right was targeted and killed in the jugular, in front of hundreds of people, in front of millions of viewers, in front of two very small children. We at LGB Alliance know the importance of freedom of speech and the importance of distinguishing fascist violence from speech we find offensive or abhorrent, even. We have also been the target of online threats for our speech for daring to say that biological sex is relevant to sexual orientation, that single-sex spaces are essential for homosexual community, and that so-called gender transition of minors can harm proto-gay kids. Last week, we witnessed what happens when online threats bleeds into real life, and we couldn't help but think, this could have happened to one of us. Following the assassination of Charlie Kirk, many people were seen indifferent to his murder. Some were seen celebrating his murder, and then there were those who were even calling for more killing. To all of those people, we ask, what happens when someone deems your speech so intolerable, so threatening that they see to it that you never speak again. It happened to Charlie. It could happen to us, and it could happen to you. We must be willing to sit at the table with those whom we disagree with. We must be willing to talk with people whose views we deem as vile. We must be willing to build bridges with those whose worldview is so radically different from our own that we cannot even recognize it as the same world. With that said, we are allowed to feel the hurt that comes from offensive speech, and we should name the harms that can often follow speech that is disrespectful and dehumanizing. Hopefully, in doing so, our aim is not to shut down the discourse entirely, but to widen the dialogue enough for us all to find common ground or understanding. When it comes to freedom of speech, we should choose our words carefully, not because we will be imprisoned or shot for our words, but because we want to reach an understanding with those who see things from a different perspective. We should choose our words carefully so that we may communicate clearly and with compassion. Finally, with freedom of speech comes its essential partner, active listening. We need to listen with the aim of understanding someone's meaning. We can acknowledge and point out when something offensive has been said, but we do our best to hear the root of what is being said, the emotion behind it, the intention, the heart. It can be difficult when the person saying those words has a smug look on their face, has a fuck you look in their eyes, or is themselves clearly intent in misunderstanding you. But even with such obstacles in our way, we have the power to change the status quo. There is always a way for we, the people, to build a more perfect union. Thank you. Ariane?
Thank you, Sylvia, for that very important message. We'll end this week's news roundup on that note. Thanks for watching. Remember again to submit your public comments, and we'll see you again next week. Goodbye.